So what's up, man? My Cornish friend.
Yeah, I got probably some latent Cornish roots.
Is there like a certain place or city or nation or multiple nations or cities that are kind of the center or the epicenter of permaculture, where people are up on it, people are really on it, or is it just super spread out?
Well, I mean, the place that the country that it started or was first sort of developed and conceptually pieced together was Australia.
Right, Bill Mollison.
Bill Mollison and David Holmgren in the late 70s, early 80s, when it really was like sort of codified.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, this was an outgrowth of the environmental movements, so the growing environmental awareness that started in the late 60s with people like Rachel Carson and the like. And then, of course, you had books like Limits to Growth, and Declarations from the Club of Rome, looking at the effects of sort of globalized industrialization and the detrimental environmental effects that came from that. And Australia is interesting because it's a sparsely populated continent.
Right. There's more kangaroos than people.
Yeah. I mean, it's
literally, they told me that when I was there. I was like, for real?
Yeah. I mean, the place is. I mean, it's enormous. It's the size of the continental U.S. and it's they got maybe 22 million people.
Mm-hmm.
So there are more people in California, than there are in the entire continent. So, but it also happens to be, it's the driest continent. It's the driest inhabited continent on the planet.
Right.
It's the flattest. It's had the most amount of environmental degradation and destruction in the shortest amount of time.
Really? It wasn't always like super desertified?
No. It's been sort of pushed over the edge. Again, the fastest because of an attempt to try to kind of graft onto that particular sort of physical setting, the environmental setting, things that had been done in Europe. And because that particular sort of biome, that the ecology that makes up Australia is very, very unique. Sort of the margin for error wasn't very large.
Right. So you're introducing all these other species, trees, people, like it's just...
And even the way that the landscapes were managed. The way, say, for instance, livestock was managed to introduce the landscape, the way they were moving across the landscape. All of those things you just mentioned, the introduction of invasives, the cutting down of trees. There's certain things about the sort of the hydrological character of the landscapes there. I mean, all of those things, they're very particular to that place. And the mismanagement has brought about a certain set of conditions that necessitated Australians learning how to do things in a very different way. Some Australians recognizing the fact that they needed to do things in a different way. But I think the interesting thing about sort of permaculture as a construct, as a conceptual construct, is that, I mean, Bill Mollison, says even in the beginnings of a lot of his writings that there's really nothing new about permaculture in and of itself.
Right.
Really, it's a collection of a type of environmental or ecological wisdom that comes from a lot of indigenous cultures, people that live very, very close to nature. What permaculture has attempted to do is to articulate certain common threads that you'll find in all of these different sort of indigenous ways of being in the world, in sort of create a type of, I guess, more scientific, quote unquote, scientific presentation of those ways.
Right.
And looking at different methods or different ways that you can link different sciences, different areas of study that can explain functionally what is it about these ways of being that provides, I think, a more attractive, a more viable means for humans to live in the world without destroying the places that they live in. And I think it presents some very interesting set of possibilities if it's taken seriously. If it's taken seriously. And I think that's one of the things that we're going to continue to see as things worsen, as conditions, continue to get more
dire.
So dire, like hard to ignore.
Right.
I mean, these are things that I think more people are going to have to take on.
Yeah, you're seeing, like, I think permaculture as a concept, even as like a buzzword, has almost taken on the same power or the same kind of cultural weight as something like sustainable. Like, you just hear permaculture thrown around. And like there's this big music festival in California called Symbiosis, and it's coming up in sometime this summer. I think it's September maybe. And Dave Platford, he's doing like some art for it.
Okay.
So, but anyway, I was checking out their website, and it's huge, dude. It's kind of like Burning Man-esque, where there's all this art and music, and like for 3 days, like thousands of people descend on like, some kind of like lake or something like that.
Right.
But they have these like workshops beforehand, and they have like, yoga workshop and like meditation retreat, and they have a permaculture retreat as part of this music festival.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I was like, yo, that's crazy. That's some unprecedented, very California, but like to the fact that is a vibe, like, yo, I'm about to go listen to music, and before that, I'm going to like learn about permaculture for a week.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting about it is I think that there are aspects of permaculture, there are different aspects to what makes up permaculture. I mean, I think there are different sort of facets that appeal to different sensibilities. I think there's a certain sort of kind of lifestyleism that's often attached to permaculture that doesn't necessarily do it justice. In that, I'm saying, I want to clarify what I mean by that.
Right.
Is that I think that permaculture, I think when it's presented properly and when it's properly contextualized, I think presents a very powerful set of possibilities to, again, present it has the potential to show how we can create sort of a civilizational infrastructure that can be regenerative as opposed to destructive.
Right. Right. Because for someone who just doesn't really know, they've heard the word maybe, but like what's your elevator pitch for like what permaculture is?
Well, it's described as being a design science. It's a design science. It's a linking science between, again, different areas of study, between different fields of study, which provides us a chance to, again, supply all of the needs of human societies, human civilizations, food, shelter, again, fiber, again, infrastructure, all of the things that human societies need in order to live, but again, in a way that does not destroy the places in which we find ourselves living. And this is accomplished by recognizing the fact that we do live in a world that has a certain type of living infrastructure, nature, and that we can create systems that provide all of our needs that also work in concert with natural systems, with living systems. But you first need to understand how these systems operate, and if you can understand how, if you make it a priority to understand how they operate, then you can possibly create some kind of mutually beneficial arrangement. It's an attempt to try to renegotiate the relationship of human beings to the natural world. Right. Now, this isn't necessarily some kind of sort of airy-fairy,
hippie stuff.
Yeah. And I don't want to say, and that's not to sort of besmirch, or
we love hippies.
Hippies, the good people, hard people.
Some of the best people. How can you be mad at a hippie?
Yeah, exactly. So, like the nicest, sweetest, people that I've ever known would be characterized as quote unquote hippies. But and I think by the same token, it's also not necessarily concerned with creating some kind of utopia.
Right.
But I think it's trying to give people an opportunity to have some kind of intelligent approach to being in the world. Because, I like to think that people have enough intelligence, enough of a sort of mental capacity to be able to live without, again, taking a dump in your own bed. In fact, it's not the hallmark of, of a being with a large brain.
Right.
And I think the beauty of what we're seeing happening in the world now, as far as sort of climate change or climate weirding, whatever you want to call it. There's a massive amount of land degradation now. There's probably flooding and drought.
Destruction of the freaking ocean. The
oceans
supplies,
are acidifying, and there's all you're losing however many species a day, and
the rainforest is being logged.
Land degradation, desertification, the whole 9 yards. And now you're seeing armed conflicts, things like the Arab Spring. I mean, that whole phenomenon was said to partially be due to for example, Syria. There's a massive amount of internally displaced people that actually started with the chronic droughts that started occurring in the mid 2000s, and that actually, was started to create the conditions that the unrest there ended up resulting in. Those conditions are forcing us to have to look at the world in a very different way. And again, I think it's sort of the hallmark of intelligent people, if they, again, in looking at what's happening. There's some understanding that we need to sort of plot a new path, or else we're just simply not. This is going to be just a very unpleasant place to be, and it doesn't have to be that way. And I think what's even more interesting about that is, if you look at sort of historically the rise and fall of civilizations, and there are a lot of books that are written about this, a lot of studies that have been done, sort of historical surveys, that they've all failed. They've all failed for very similar reasons, and invariably there's been some variation on the theme of undermining the resource base that these civilizations have relied upon in order to exist. And then once you use up all the resources, you have to pick up and go somewhere else. Well, the problem now is there's nowhere else to go. So how do you get over the hurdle of, okay, you're now in a world where you have 7 billion plus people. Right. There's really, there's no new land to go to. There's 2 billion hectares of severely degraded land. 75% of that is potentially recoverable. 500 million hectares.
Deserts, basically. Deserts you're talking
about. Yeah, it's like heavily degraded land that's no longer either functional or productive. And about 500 million hectares of that land is actually recoverable. I'm sorry. 75% of the 2 billion, that's 1.5 billion hectares, is recoverable. About 500 million has been abandoned. That's what it is. So You know, it's a crisis, but I think, you know, like any crisis, there's also an opportunity that's presented if you sort of read the situation
Right.
Properly. And I think the question is, how do we respond to that challenge? Because you can recover. You can recover degraded land. You can recover quote unquote dead land. The land's not dead; it's just dormant. And if you understand what needs to be done to to fix the problem, then it can be fixed. But you first have to decide that this is a priority. This is something that needs to be done. And then you have to invest the time and the resources and the and the capital necessary to bring it to do the job properly.
So that's the thing. Like, people bring you on. You got NGOs, governments as advisors on project. Because that's my question. It's like, are people with big bread and who are really movers and shakers seeing the importance of it? Because what you see from a lot of the kind of counter permaculture thing is like, look, man, we got all this technology, we got all this. We need to genetically modify. We need to maximize. We need to. Monsanto's important because we got all these people to feed. We got 8 billion people to feed, and so all this talk about the natural way, that was cool if you're just a small village or what have you. But like, you're trying to feed the whole world, we need freaking, you know what I'm saying? That whole narrative.
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing is, just to state it very simply, that's not true.
Right.
And there's been quite a lot of work done in the way of studies to actually demonstrate that narrative of you need genetically modified organisms or food in order to feed everybody.
You need all these chemicals and pesticides.
Yeah, if anything, well, the funny thing is that there's a outfit called the Rodale Institute in Pennsylvania. They just completed a 30-year study showing that organic agriculture, for example, actually outperforms conventional ag. Ag that uses all the chemicals and all these things. It actually is better under drought conditions. This is definitely the case with genetically modified foods. And the problem now, even with the current system that's in place, as inefficient and as destructive as it is, it still does produce enough food to feed everybody. It produces roughly 1.5 times as much food as is required to feed everybody on the planet. The problem is, by and large, is distribution of it. And then also there's a problem in thinking that the way that we fix sort of the hunger issue in the world is through quantity as opposed to quality, because a lot of the food that's produced is actually, in terms of its nutritive content, is severely lacking, and that is directly linked to the condition of land. Because really, if you think about it, when you grow something, when you grow food, for example, you're actually pulling up nutrients in order to actually provide the plant or whatever's being produced, to provide it the means to actually fully mature. And there needs to be some sort of reinvestment or replenishment of the nutrients that are pulled up to produce the food. And in most cases, especially with conventional industrial agriculture, that reinvestment doesn't take place. So the production of food is like a type of mining. It's like a nutrient mining. Until you get to the point where you pull up everything and there's nothing else to pull up, and then you got to go somewhere else. And this, interestingly enough, this is sort of the story of how human civilizations, or why human civilizations have moved from place to place, is because people have been in one place, they sort of use up the land to a certain point, there's nothing else to use up, and then you got to go somewhere else. And so, this is why human history is progressive in terms of, again, it's sort of geographical movement from one place to another. But again, even if we look at the amount of land that now is used to grow food on, which is roughly, again, about 1.5 billion hectares, about 3.75 billion acres. If you look at some of the more successful examples of people, again, growing food on a relative, being able to produce a lot of food on a small amount of area, actually high quality food without the chemicals or the type of destructive practices. If you were able to scale up those methods, you would only need about 5% of the current area on the planet that is now used to cultivate or to grow food to feed everybody. You only need about 5%. That's how inefficient, the methods that we're using now are in supplying, those.
And that's the thing. Permaculture isn't on some like Luddite, like don't use technology. It's actually like use all the tools possible. But the point is that you can work with nature so that you're actually putting more nutrients back into the soil and having everything be this flow. So everything is complementing each other instead of that you're just like, destroying and destroying and destroying.
Yeah, I mean the idea is that it's not a battle. You're not trying to fight the natural world. And I think this kind of goes back to some, I think, fundamental misconceptions or mistakes that are made as to how the human being is positioned in relation to the natural world, to where somehow we're separate from it as opposed to being an integral part of it.
Right.
And instead of seeing it as an adversary or something that needs to be dominated, it's actually something that if we are looking at it with the sort of from the right perspective,
right,
it's actually something that can make us better than we are, and we can actually help to make it better than it is, and that there is, again, a sort of a mutually beneficial position or relationship that can be developed. It's sort of like, you're part of a body, right? And what's the thing that makes the body what it is and as effective as it is that it's all of these different parts, all of these different organs that have different functions. And they're all linked together in a way that each of these different organs are made better for being linked to another organ that does something that it can't do.
Right.
So everybody sort of has a job that the other organs need in order to make the body complete. And human beings are just one of many organs that makes the natural world what it is. And that body can be made either better or worse depending on how we as an organ function within it. And we happen to be sort of a pretty dominant part of the body that right now is acting in a way that
we're flaring up, dude.
It's sort of inducing an autoimmune response.
We're the freaking hemorrhoids of that.
There we go.
Okay, we're just flaring up.
This is true.
And everybody's like, okay, dude, we can't. Like, you're just screwing it up for everybody. We can't just go about our life.
No, this is the unfortunate thing. But, it's like, that, I think if it's a matter of just being able to shift perspectives. But I mean, I think this is, it's part of a narrative that I think too many people have been fed for a long time, and that, again, is sort of this idea that we're supposed to be dominators of nature as opposed to, it's sort of I think most of the sort of Abrahamic, if we start, get into discussions about religion or spiritual traditions, faith traditions, we are supposedly sort of stewards as opposed to dominators.
Khalifa.
Exactly. So it's, you're the vicegerent. And I think that's something that has been completely misconstrued. And we haven't actually gotten into this yet, but, we were talking about some of this earlier today, but I think one of the things that I think really makes permaculture particularly powerful is that it's not so much about the techniques or the strategies or the methods that are applied to, dealing with land or what have you. It's what are the things that are informing the actions, which are then sort of translated to land and the natural world. And there's an ethical sensibility, there's an ethical component that lies at the heart of what makes permaculture what it is. And there is this, this ethical intelligence,
right?
This ethical awareness, which I think, ethics are kind of seen as being somewhat of a quaint idea in the world now, sort of an antiquated idea.
For sure.
And we're more concerned about technique and sort of the sort of kind of like technical triumphalism.
Right.
The ability to be able to meddle and manipulate things, and not asking whether or not having that ability is something that we should sort of impose on the world.
Well, that's actually part of the scientific method, is that the questions of morality or right or wrong are actually, like, you leave that out of the discussion,
right,
because it's not proper. It can't properly be measured quantitatively in the material realms by those tools.
Right.
Like, so, they say, we'll leave that to the philosophers and the theologians, but that's the difference between science as a tool, which is an incredibly powerful tool, obviously, which leads to technology and leads to the modern world. But there's a paradigm which is very dominant, which says the only way to know truth at all is through the scientific method. There can be no other truth. Okay, you have your truth maybe with a lowercase t, but there can be no truth with a capital T outside of the scientific method. And, that's scientism, like, as an ideology, which... Yeah. And yeah, man, I mean, I think you're hitting the nail right on the head in the sense that, like, it really takes a paradigm shift. Like, for, like, what are we as human beings? What is the earth? What are we doing on earth? It really has to be that big. Yeah. It can't be just, like, tweak a little thing, like, you know what I mean? Like, otherwise it's just a Band-Aid. Like, we need a radical paradigm shift. And it's interesting that, Syed Hussein Nasr talked about that. Like, he wrote, like, Man and Nature, those books, like, in the 60s or something. Like, he was the first one talking about it before anyone was even really thinking about it. And he really, like, offers that critique that, like, you really have to step out and see that all traditional indigenous peoples really saw the earth as this sacred web of life that they were connected to. And if we don't start to challenge the concept of the earth as just, like, kind of this, like, tool to be manipulated at our will, and it's like, but how do you do that? And I mean, I think that really gets down to where it's at. And it's like, Louis C.K., the comedian?
Yeah.
He has this bit that's really hilarious because he's like, it's funny that, like, the right-wing Christians, the people that claim to, like, love God the most, are the most unconcerned about what we do to the earth. And he's just like, wouldn't you think that if you believe, like, God, that he left this for you and he was going to come back, wouldn't you be shook? That, like, when he gets back, he's just going to be like, what'd you do? Like, he's like, I gave this all to you. Like, what did you do? He's like, the polar bears. The polar bears are brown. Why are the polar bears brown? And it's just hilarious, that bit, because he's just like, dude, he just shows, like, this stupidness of him. He's like, I don't know. And he's like, well, because we needed cars. And he's like, what's a car? And he's like, we needed gas. He's like, gas? Why'd you take that out of the earth? It was in the earth. He was like, well, we wanted to go faster and faster. Like, he was like, what, why didn't you just eat the food that I left there? He's like, well, no, because it didn't have bacon on it. I wanted bacon. He was like, well, like, we needed jobs. He's like, what is a job? I just left the food there, sleep on the ground, make a house. Like, and it's really just, like, the best comedy is getting at, like, bigger questions in a way that disarms it.
No, absolutely. I mean, but I think what he was, I mean, what you were just pointing to is this larger question of, I mean, aside from having sort of a certain level of technical prowess, is, again, what is that technical prowess informed by? And so now you have to start talking about, wisdom.
Right.
Is there a type of wisdom that informs your actions? Is there wisdom? Is there ethics? You know, we can talk about is there an etiquette? You know, like is there like the whole concept of adab? You know, being able putting things in their rightful place. Again, I think, you know, now those again are sort of quaint ideas that don't necessarily have a lot of currency. It's just a matter of whether or not you are, again, technically capable of doing something or not technically capable of doing something. And again, it's just a sort of like technological triumphalism. It's like sort of scientific triumphalism.
Right.
And that leads, you know, that's leading us, or that has led us to a particular point in history, at this point, human history, that that only now, I think, you know, within the past, say, 40 years, 45 years, people are being forced to rethink, because that particular way of looking at the world is creating a pretty, I mean, it's creating a place that is becoming increasingly more uninhabitable, increasingly more hostile, and it's creating a situation where people are becoming, you know, that much more, you know, prone to conflict, because, you know, it's you know, you're having a sort of the vast majority of humanity subject to the whims of a relatively small number of people that have access to, you know, the material, the resources that are creating, you know, an enormous amount of convenience for a small number of people, and again, a very unpleasant place for the vast majority of people. And at some point, you know, that's got to end. I mean, there's I think it was a guy, I quote, Herbert Stein, who I think was the chief of economic advisors for was President Ford and President Nixon. And he said that things that can't go on forever don't. And I mean, this, you know, and it's obvious that, you know, this can't go on forever. But, you know, but I think that point you were making, I think, you know, you have to start reassessing the assumptions that are made, which somehow justifies or legitimizes certain ways of being in the world. And I think, as you said, you know, this kind of paradigm of man as dominator.
Right.
It's a bit, I mean, logically that it just can't last.
Yeah.
You know, it's you know, we have to find another way of sort of renegotiating the manner in which we, you know, we operate. And that's becoming more and more evident. It's I mean, you can't continue to be sort of willfully ignorant of that fact.
Right.
You know, this is not, you know, this is not something, it's becoming increasingly, I mean, it's non-negotiable. You know, it's non-negotiable. You can look at the situation in California.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Right where we are sitting.
You know, I mean, right where we're sitting right now, you know, you have an unprecedented drought where, you know, for the first time in the history of the state, the governor announces a statewide, you know, rationing of water, or at least cutting of water use, 25 or 30%.
Right.
You know, exceptional drought. It's actually beyond severe drought. Right. Exceptional drought.
Like there's on some, that's what's crazy about it is they're on some, like, we're about to run out of water in a couple years. And like, and it's like, and they're all like, and then, like, there's not on some, and then, so then there's just like some, and then it's like, well, I'm not really sure. Like, it's like, nobody's like, on some, like, well, we have a plan. Everyone's like, and it was a trip, like driving over to the city, to San Francisco, you know, the Bay Bridge, where it's like, whatever, freaking, who knows how many thousands and thousands of people cross that every day. Yeah. And it's like, they got the big sign, the LED sign, and it's like, refrain from using too much water, take shorter showers, take, you know, don't water your lawns. And I'm like, trip out, dude. This is on some, you know what I mean? Like, but I really feel like, and that kind of, this was one thing that I was coming up as you're saying all this, is like, I don't know if it's the pessimist in me or just the like, but it's like, my question is, will people really care until it's just hits the fan? Like, is it like, you know, people are just, it seems like people are not really going to trip off how much water they use until water stops coming out. Yeah. Or like they ration, like, oh yeah, from like 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., yeah, 4 hours a day, that's when your water runs. Otherwise, the tap's just off. Like, then cats are going to be like, yo, this is super serious, dude. Otherwise, it's like, I'm going to just take my hour-long shower and listen to my freaking radio and just kind of dance and sing along.
Well, I mean, but I think but those are the people we've been sort of raised to be. Like, that's who we are. Like, that's the expectation.
Right.
Is that, you know, we have been acculturated, socialized, and taught to sort of indulge ourselves. I mean, that's how the place runs. I mean, we're not even really citizens anymore. Like, we're consumers.
Right.
You know, and the degree to which you're seen as having value in, you know, in the type of society or culture that we've come up in is the degree to which you are willing and capable of engaging in this activity of being a consumer. And it's very difficult to disengage from that, especially given the degree to which you have all of this sort of messaging and material that is trying to induce you into being that kind of being. You know, you look at the, you know, it's all the advertising and it's the movies and the shows and the, you know, product placement and I mean that, you know, there's like this assiduous attempt, you know, to create a certain type of person that is that wants to, or that should want to, in order to be seen as sort of normal, you know, within this particular context. They want to be that person that, you know, go to the mall and, you know, go to the amusement park, go to the movies, go to the supermarket, whatever, you know, you're engaging in that activity.
Right.
And I think, and then you see how that sort of extends out to the, you know, to the other parts of the world where that messaging is sent to those people too, where they sort of aspire to be those people.
All the way, bro.
You know, so, you know, it's, I mean, as you said, it's something that I think has to be sort of addressed comprehensively. You have to look at, okay, well, what kind of people are we sort of striving to be? And I think, again, this has to be sort of a re-envisioning of sort of the ultimate purpose of the human being and the ultimate purpose of your existence. And I think, you know, circumstances are gonna force people to have to take a very long, hard look at that.
Right. But that's the question. Do you think there can be a mass awakening or a mass kind of like muhasabah, like in the sense of taking yourself to account on a societal level before it gets so bad that, you know what I mean? Because it's one thing if it's like, okay, say freaking water stops coming out of the tap, there's an earthquake, you know, San Andreas, and like we're on the Hayward Fault right now. Yeah. So there was just a few days. You were here when the quake happened. It was right in Fremont where and like Seattle, like we're due. So this not happen, I mean, but say it, you know, say it's just a big one, you know what I mean, and like boom, you know, like pipes break, you know what I mean, the food stops, the shelves aren't restocked, you know, water's not coming out of the taps, like then it's boom, you know what I mean, like how long before it's just straight pandemonium? Does it have to get there, or can people be like, yo, we're gonna wake up, we're going to alter our patterns of consumption, alter our relationship with the earth, alter our relationship with each other, and we're going to model on a local and then on a national level these type of things. And then the other question is it top down? Or is it like, can it be bottom up? Like, can the change come from communal level?
No, it's funny. It's funny you asked that second question, because there was a workshop that we were doing in Switzerland, which was actually looking at that exact same question. Is you know, sort of these rehabilitation efforts for degraded land, or these attempts at trying to implement, you know, these types of management regimes that are much more sort of again regenerative in nature as far as how you manage landscape or how you rehabilitate damaged land. Is it top down or is it bottom up? Mm-hmm. And I don't know. I don't think it's necessarily a matter of either or. It's pretty much, as you say in the Bay, it's pretty much, how you can get in where you fit in. Mm-hmm. And in some instances, it is top down if you happen to be able to talk to those people who can implement, those kinds of programs. Or it's from bottom up. It's from grassroots. It's you can make an appeal to communities, and they're able to see how adopting these things is going to benefit them. If they realize they're the primary stakeholders, they're the people that are going to see the most benefit. They have ownership of the work, and what comes from the work that they do. There's certain common threads that you'll find in successful efforts. But I think in our case, I find actually working in this part of the world, except outside of the people that are already sort of turned on to these issues, it's a very difficult place to work because you have to sort of rewire or reconfigure people's cognitive mapping, if you will. Mm-hmm.
When you say this part of the world, you mean where?
Meaning kind of first world, you're in the first world, first world consumer industrial economies, right. And the cultures that, and sort of the culture that accompanies that, is that you have a very particular sort of worldview that kind of gets into what we were saying before about how we're socialized and acculturated and educated, to where, this is it's like the Titanic. It's like, when the Titanic first sailed, it was like, this is the unsinkable ship.
That's right. Even right? God himself couldn't sink the ship. Don't say that.
Right. No, there you go. This, or if you feel like what you have here is sort of ordained, kind of like divinely ordained, and this is something that
God gave us the ship and said it could never, sink. Yeah.
Yeah. So if that's the belief, and I think this is the fear, is it is sort of like folks are living sort of this unexamined life. It's this unexamined life. Man. There's no, like, people aren't prompted into having to think too deeply about what it is that they're doing. And on average, people don't change or they don't make changes unless they have to.
That's right.
And that's just how we operate. Mm-hmm. You become habituated to certain ways of being, right. And there's a certain amount of momentum that is built up that's very difficult to sort of redirect. Mm-hmm. So in a way, unless something very dramatic happens that sort of knocks you into another trajectory, but you just sort of carry on because it's just the direction that you're going, and it's what you're used to doing. It's what's comfortable. Right. And I think most people find, especially the kinds of changes that, would be proposed in order to avert the kind of disaster that, that I think most people that are familiar with, this topic, the type of disaster that a lot of people are foreseeing is on the horizon. One would hope that, one would hope that the kinds of things that some people are talking about are likely to occur. One would hope that they don't occur. But if you look at the kinds of things that are happening in different parts of the world, I mean, Iraq or Syria or any number of those places where people had sort of a normal life, and then all of a sudden it's not normal anymore. Mm-hmm. Like, why? You have to ask yourself, well, why those people? Mm-hmm. And why not us? Like, why are those people more sort of deserving of having their lives disrupted and not us? And to think that it can't happen here, I mean, that's just, it's a setup, it's a setup, and what's to say that you couldn't be blindsided by something, and then all of a sudden you find yourself in a situation where, oh my God, we have to contend with, with this completely different reality that nobody thought could happen to them because they somehow thought they were beyond, they were beyond, this from happening to them, that this was somehow so far removed and they were so far outside of, that set of possibilities that they didn't even think about it. They didn't even entertain the possibility.
Right. Yeah. And like you said, everything in our society is really such a strong, everything is pushing you so strongly to be totally heedless. Like there's so much stimulation and distraction that it's just like, I mean, to unplug from the matrix is not an easy piece. And even if you do, say you're up on all this stuff, there's another space. Like I feel like when you're in kind of a liberal West Coast city, places like the Bay, there's a lot of people who would vibe with all this stuff. And they're like, it's unsustainable. The fact that 0.1% of the population controls 75% of the resources or whatever, it's not sustainable. People in their individual lives anyway are moral. They see somebody hungry, they want to give to them. Their neighbor, you know what I mean? But I think a lot of people just feel like when it gets to the big picture, super helpless. There's nothing I can do. So I'm just going to try to do my little whatever, be nice to people, give my little charity, and then go about my business, do what I have to in the matrix. You know what I mean?
I think it's really easy to fall into the despair trap, and it can be very really discouraging in terms of you even being able to, sort of posit another way of being or another way of doing things, because you just feel like you don't have the means. The funny thing was, I know before I started doing this, and the work that I'm doing now, and I was transitioning out of the work that I was doing previously. I had I went to school for engineering, and I did engineering on and off for a number of years, and then I just was like, I can't do this anymore. I can't work in an office. I can't work 9-to-5 gig. I just can't. It was just something about it that it left a lot to be desired, and you just think there's got to be this can't be it. Right? This can't be it. It's got to be something else. The funny thing was, things didn't start happening in terms of, the possibility of thinking of another way, another paradigm. Things didn't start happening until I allowed myself to think big enough. In terms of sort of the size and the scale and the possibility that another way was possible. And I don't mean in sort of the kind of wishy-washy, amorphous, non-specific, way of thinking another way is possible. But there really is sort of in terms of the practicalities of creating another paradigm, another model, that's out there. But you have to allow yourself to entertain that possibility, and then you can start putting the pieces together to actually move in that direction. To where now I find myself in a position of where, if you asked me, 5 or 6 years ago that I would be in this place, I would probably say it would be highly that I would like to think it was possible, but I wouldn't necessarily think that it would be likely. And if anything, I actually find myself in a position that is probably beyond, at least at this point, beyond what I thought I was going to be able to do, 5 or 6 years ago.
Right.
So, for example, I just came from, this international conference I've been attending the last 4 years in Switzerland, to where now I'm now co-director of an organization called the Permaculture Research Institute, which is directed by the man I went to go train under, Jeff Lawton. He had asked me to become a director last September, which was completely out of the blue. That was not something I was expecting. We're now an organization that is accredited by the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, the United Nations Climate Technology Center and Network. We've been doing project work with governments, members of royal families in the Middle East. We've got project work all over the world. People are inviting us to come to do work with them. We have people most recently in Iran that want us to come back and do work with them in Iran. All of these things that have begun to open up, because I think there is this understanding that there's a need for these, for some kind of alternative, sort of to allow people to escape from what I think a lot of folks are seeing as being this very unpleasant, destructive future. And I think if you have to sort of allow yourself to think of another set of possibilities that doesn't necessitate us running ourselves and the world into the ground. And intention is a powerful thing. It's a very powerful thing. And I think if allowing yourself to really have a big intention, a good intention, that's when things start happening. And honestly, that is precisely what happened in the case of myself and a number of other people that have started doing this work, is that things didn't start happening until they allowed themselves to think big enough.
إن الأعمال بالنيات. Actions are by intentions. What are some of the projects or things you're involved in, or specific maybe initiatives or locations that you're most excited about?
Well, most recently, again, the last couple of years, we've been trying to develop this relationship with UNCCD, and they are now wanting to embark on this initiative to look at this, again, 2 billion hectares of degraded land worldwide, and specifically looking at this 500 million hectares globally that have been abandoned, that we can actually start doing some of this, rehabilitation work on. And I had put together some ideas as to how we can scale up and speed up reclamation work in some of these areas. One project in particular, there's actually something called the Great Green Wall of Africa, which is supposed to be a band of trees. It's 8,000 kilometers long, 15 kilometers wide, that goes across the entire Sahelian band, basically to prevent the migration of the Sahara Desert further south into sub-Saharan Africa. And there's already been work started in Senegal, and it's making its way across the continent. And so I was talking to some folks about how, say for instance, that particular project could be helped in its ability to establish that work faster. And there are a number of other places that we can implement the same measures. But, we currently have work in Yemen, in Tarim, in the Hadramaut Valley. We have work in Saudi, in the Governorate of Mecca, a project called the Al-Bayda Project.
In Mecca itself?
In the Governorate of Mecca, in a place called Wadi al-Khanik.
It's like a suburb. It's like a suburb.
Well, it's actually an outlying area in the desert. It's actually being mostly the work is mostly being done by a Bedouin tribe. The project was managed by a colleague of ours named Neil Spackman, and he's been doing some amazing work in that area. We have work in Jordan, who we've been doing work with actually with the help of Princess Basma bin Ali, who's a member of the Jordanian royal family. I just taught a course with Jeff back in the spring there. We have a site in the Jordan Valley. It's called Greening the Desert 2. You can find some things online about that. I'm supposed to go back and teach a course in November, the same site. We have work in Turkey. I'm actually supposed to teach a course in Turkey in late August, early September. Morocco. We work New Zealand, again, sites in Australia. We actually recently had another site up in Scotland that was just started. And we have there are opportunities all over the place, and I think that what's encouraging is we get more and more inquiries all the time. To mention Iran, Jeff had done some work with the Iranians. Interestingly enough, the Ministry of Agriculture in Iran back in 2008, 2009, and we had recently got gotten some results back from the work that they had started then, actually late last year. And Jeff had, sent me this slideshow. He says, "You wait till you see this," and they got some incredible results from the work that they've done in Fardus province, which is it's the province that borders the eastern side of the eastern portion of the Persian Gulf. And they had implemented some sort of some large scale composting program on about 5,000 hectares of agricultural land. And in some cases, in many cases, they got these really great increases in agricultural output and in improvement of the function of landscape there. But probably some of the more dramatic increases they got were a threefold increase in output, but for a 2/3 reduction in water use. So basically, for only using 1/3 of the water they would typically use, they got 3 times the output. Mm-hmm. And these are the kinds of things that we see in a number of places that have implemented similar types of programs. And I think the more that this information gets out, I like to think the more hope that people will have that we can do things differently, again, more intelligently, and in a way that actually I think reflects well on our species, and can actually present us with a hopeful future. But you have to decide that this is something that you want to do. And I think until people get to the point that it becomes a priority and they really see it as a possibility, they can envision themselves engaging in that activity. It's not going to happen, but I think we're seeing that more and more people are coming around to that, because again, we can't continue to do things that do the types of things that we're doing. We got to think differently.
So in Africa, the desert is basically spreading. Is that what's happening?
Absolutely, yeah.
So it's going south.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is the way to basically stop desertification is to plant, basically.
Well, yeah, I mean, the desertification is, there are a few things that characterize desertified areas. I mean, arid areas are usually defined as areas that have more evaporation than they have precipitation. So if you go to a place like the GCC countries, the Gulf countries, the Gulf states, you may have, on average, anywhere from maybe 70 to 150 millimeters of rain a year. But, the rate of evaporation is something like 2,500 to 4,500 millimeters a year. So you have, literally 40, 50, 60 times the amount of water that actually leaves the area than actually falls as rain. But what's interesting about that particular part of the world is that it was not always like that.
Right.
So if you go back a few thousand years, and there's actually quite a bit of work that you can find that supports this, and you can see from satellite photos areas, you can see places that used to be sort of the basins of lakes or rivers. There have been agricultural digs where they found remnants of woolly mammoth. I mean, ruminants, large grass-eating animals. I mean, I've done work in Western Sahara, which is, it's desert. And I've seen cave paintings of the depiction of hunting parties. Where you can see animals like giraffes or buffalo, like kind of large animals with horns, with hunting parties that are behind them. And you go out and look at these landscapes, and and obviously it's not in a condition now to support those kinds of animals. But you could, if you go back far enough in history, North Africa was forested.
Right.
And in some historical accounts, it said it was so heavily forested that like a squirrel could cross the entire continent without ever touching the ground.
Right.
You would have that kind of tree cover, and so once you remove the vegetation in an area, once you remove the shade or the cover that would prevent the kind of heavy evaporation that you see now in desertified areas, sort of that condition worsens faster and faster to where you eventually actually affect the weather. So you start to disrupt things like the water cycle, all the big biogeochemical cycles. To once you start affecting that, then over time, you vastly alter the actual physical condition of those parts of the world to where you no longer have that kind of cycling, that kind of dynamic, which allows for you to have vegetation, and then also allows for people to be able to live in those areas. So, and you're seeing that happen in more and more places. I mean, even in places like Southeast Asia that get heavy rain. So if you go to places like Kuala Lumpur, you go to places like Thailand, even Bangkok. There's a story earlier this year, I mean, actually not that long ago, that said that Bangkok is actually in danger of running out of water. And now this is a place that gets like 3,000 millimeters of rain a year.
Rainforest,
yeah. But there's because so much of that place is being paved over, because a lot of the vegetation has been removed. It doesn't have a chance to get back into the ground, and then also the way that the weather behaves, that's altered because, again, those things that would regulate the way that water moves between the land and the atmosphere, they're all gone. So it's after you see enough places where this is happening, it becomes actually quite predictable.
Right.
And it can be changed.
Right. It can be reversed.
It can be reversed, but you have to do the right thing. You have to actually resolve to do the things necessary in order to change the condition.
Right. So it's conceivable that. So what would be like basically if you had all the resources, what is the method to reverse, for instance, if you're talking about Africa or other places, because it's a lot of places you mentioned, it seems like they're deserts, like Middle East, a lot of Middle Eastern places. I know like Yemen has had some serious issues, and they talk about Sana'a. I mean, even before freaking started getting bombed by Saudis, but before that, there was talking about Sana'a being the first major city to run out of water.
Yeah,
a lot of it has to do with qat production, right? Because they for those that don't know, qat is this narcotic, which is like coca leaves, which people chew, and it's a cash crop. You make bread because everyone chews it so much, but it takes a lot of water, and so you're just wasting water. And of course, like that project, making the desert bloom in Jordan. You're talking about the desert, so it's like, what is the method to, if you had the resources, to just create an oasis in the desert? Because that's a tripped out thing. You could just create a man-made oasis in the most inhospitable of circumstances.
Well, the funny thing is that actually that oases are purpose-built arrangements of vegetation that allowed for very harsh places to be suitable for human habitation.
Right.
So, I mean, this is something that had been done, for a very long time. I mean, you can go to some places that have oases that had been constructed literally 2 millennia ago, and
they're man-made. Oases are man-made,
and they're still productive. So, you have a ready-made example that demonstrates to you how, in those kinds of settings, you need to sort of create a type of natural infrastructure that can support people. Even in Europe or North America, more temperate climates, same thing. I mean, most of those continents, they used to be like savannas, like oak savannas.
Right.
And in some cases, I mean, I know a couple of people that have been doing work on this. I mean, they're chestnut trees or oak trees that are literally thousands of years old that are still producing. And then usually you'll find in these places that they would have a combination of some kind of, again, sort of treed landscape that also had livestock, usually large herds. And the large herds would be pushed across landscape by predators. And there was this movement that actually allowed for the fertility of these places to be renewed. I mean, this is how these places were kept alive. is that there would just be this whole sort of symbiotic relationship between animals and plants and landscape, and it was this sort of this orchestrated cycling of life, you know, birth, growth, death, decay. That was all sort of part and parcel of what made these places what they were. This is how the world was made. This is how people were able to actually exist in these landscapes. Is that cycle.
Before supermarkets?
Yeah, before supermarkets. But I mean, in the cases of if we had the ability to be able to get access to the resources that would allow us to do this work in a big way, I mean, it's pretty much the same basic logical progression. Is that you first have to design landscapes for water. And in dry places, in arid places, you have to stop the fast evaporation. So you have to actually create some kind of cover. Mm-hmm. So once you're able to create some kind of cover that cuts the evaporation, then you can start to establish something because the thing you need in order to establish some kind of growth, which is water, you're now able to actually prevent that particular resource from leaving the landscape. The funny thing is, in a lot of those places, a lot of arid places, you actually get periodic flooding. So you get like times of years, a time of year where you get, a huge sort of dumping of a lot of water, and then you get flash floods, and then the rest of the year you don't get anything. So the key to designing, in arid landscapes, in hot places, in desertified places, is you have to get ready for the water when it shows up. And if you don't do the work necessary in order to capture the water when it shows up, then you got to wait a long time before it shows up again. The problem now is because the weather patterns have become that much more erratic, it's hard to predict when the water show up. So it becomes increasingly more important to do the work necessary to be able to catch water and then get it in the ground. Or,
how do you do that?
Well, in a lot of places where the land has become like heavily degraded, the ground's very hard. And it's almost like rock. So you actually have to get below that very hard, baked over, compacted layer, which allows for the water to be able to get below the surface. Because right now, a lot of water, because especially if it comes in kind of huge volumes and huge quantities, and the ground's not ready to take it on, then it just hits the ground and it runs. So you have to create infrastructure that's able to hold on to water. It doesn't allow it to run away, and it doesn't allow for it to evaporate. So you have to sort of kind of create features in landscape to be able to hold on to water for a longer period of time to get it in the ground, or to convert the water immediately to growth. So, a lot of what we talk about is, creating infrastructure and landscape to be able to slow water, infiltrate it into the ground, sink it, to stop it, and then to sink it in below the surface, and then, when possible, convert that immediately to growth, again, because the growth creates cover. The more growth, the more cover you create, then you increasingly decrease the amount of evaporation, and then you can start to establish other types of say, more productive species, tree crops or what have you, that can then start to, if you get it on a large enough scale, then you actually can have an effect, say, regionally, on things like temperature, even weather. Because you have to also remember that vegetation, it transpires water. So it actually can slowly release water back into the atmosphere. You can decrease sort of local temperatures or regional temperature. And then you're literally affecting the dynamics, like the way that energy transfers between the land and the atmosphere. And you can actually start changing regional weather. And then that's how you can sort of restart certain weather cycles in areas.
Man, yeah, that's intense, and that makes sense. Why, like, if you're the Emirates or like one, Saudi, where you have just freaking unlimited wealth,
Yeah.
and you just got a desert,
Yeah.
and you're like, this oil's gonna run out sooner or later.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and we live in a freaking terribly inhospitable place, dude. Like, I was in Abu Dhabi for like a week, and it was like the summer. It's so hot out there that basically life is like this. You're in a highly air conditioned home, like just every room blasting, and then you have to go to work or wherever you're going that day. You walk outside drenched in sweat instantly.
Yeah.
Get to your car, blasting the AC.
Yeah.
Go to work. You park your car, get out of your car, walk into your office, soaking with sweat in that walk, and then just blasting AC. Yeah. Like, you create this completely artificial environment.
No, absolutely.
Like, it's like 115, 120 degrees easy most days, and it's just like, it's crazy that people live there. And that's why, like, before they struck oil, like, it was just super sporadic villages right by the water where it was diving village. Like, that was the whole income. They would dive for pearls.
Yeah.
And, we're talking about people that develop just the lung capacity to be underwater for 10, 15 minutes without any tanks.
Right.
You know what I mean? And then all of a sudden just freaking struck oil and it's like, let's build the biggest mall possible,
right?
With a ski slope inside. We can.
Yeah.
But I mean, you would think if you have some foresight, they would be like, "Yo, it doesn't have to always be 120 degrees, man. At least we could try to like have a little project where we create, you know what I mean, where we start to really radically alter the condition of this." But you know what I mean?
Well, it's funny you mention that because I almost forgot that we actually had some work there. When the year that I went down to train with Jeff at the farm, actually while I was at the farm, he had gotten a call from a company called EDAW, which is now a subsidiary of a very large global consulting firm called AECOM. And they had called to get some input on a project they were trying to compete for, to get a contract called Masdar City, and Masdar City is in Abu Dhabi, and it happens to be at the time it was marketed as the most ambitious sustainable development project in the world. Now the funny thing was I had read about Masdar probably a couple of years, maybe 2 or 3 years before. Before I went to Australia. And I was interested in the project then, and then it was, very odd that I happened to be on the farm when he got that call. And then he went and had 3 meetings with these people, to give them some suggestions. And long story short, they ended up winning the contract. And that was sort of my first foray into at least thinking of the possibility of getting into this kind of work, because it sort of touched on some of my previous experience in doing engineering design work, contract work or consulting work, and that kind of gave us a sense of the possibilities that might be out there for really doing this, like either as a career or sort of creating another niche inside of that consulting industry. But that this was the type of development work that was going to be in demand. And now, Masdar City is an interesting project because it was supposed to be sort of a showcase for all of the different kind of state-of-the-art sustainable technologies. And the contract that we were sort of subcontracting on was for the landscape architecture of Masdar City. So Masdar's own, the city's not big. It's 6 square kilometers. It's 600 hectares. But the project was I think the price tag was somewhere between 16 and $22 billion. So it was ridiculous. You know, it was like $37 million a hectare if you break down the cost. So a lot of what we suggested, you know, for that particular project is exactly the kind of thing that you see in, you know, the oasis, you know, the type of oasis that you saw traditionally in that part of the world. The problem is that I think a lot of what they were hoping to do was sort of, you know, an attempt to try to mimic what they saw happening in Europe or in America. Which is it just doesn't fit that setting. They wanted
an evergreen forest.
I mean, it just doesn't fit that setting, and I think it speaks to a bigger problem that is like plaguing that part of the world. Is that there's this type of like inferiority complex, seemingly, to where there's a desire to sort of forsake the things that sort of made those places functional to begin with, and it was something that's very much a part of their identity. You know, the cultural heritage and identity, like historically speaking, in favor of trying to shoehorn something that just simply doesn't fit that place. Right. And I thought it was very interesting that the solution that was put forward for that particular project was something that comes from there. I mean, even when we went to go do we went to teach a couple of courses in Yemen. And I thought this was one of the really great things about what could potentially be offered by this work is it gives people an opportunity to reconnect to a portion of their heritage or their culture that has been, again, forgotten. Was when we taught the course in Hadramaut, one of the agricultural engineers that was part of the first cohort that we were teaching had brought to us a book of translated South Arabian poetry, translated into English. And one of the reasons why they brought the book was because when we started talking about this whole concept of sort of a food forest, kind of perennial polycultures, I mean, essentially, talking about agricultural oases, they would look at the poetry books because they would talk about what was planted in the landscapes. And so it was almost a way of being able to connect again, sort of this very long-standing sort of cultural expression to a very practical sort of contemporary application to inform them of what used to be out there.
For sure.
And I thought it was very powerful in that it's a type of revival, it's a type of tajdeed,
right?
Of this sort of this cultural understanding that I think could be quite powerful because there are a number of places that I went to where they had that same sort of cultural expression. When I went to Somaliland 2 years ago, it's the same thing. I talked to them about the experience in Yemen because the cultures between those two places are still very much they're very linked and they're very close. And he said, we used to do the same thing. We used to write poetry about the landscapes, and we don't do that anymore. And I think what's interesting is, kind of on a sort of more a deeper level, the condition of the landscapes ends up becoming a sort of a metaphor for the condition of the people, and vice versa. And Wendell Berry, who is a prominent American poet, the kind of poet laureate and farmer, he said paraphrasing, he said, if you want to save the people, then you have to save the land. But if you want to save the land, you have to save the people. So they're inextricably linked. And you see this in the more places you go. You see that the land and the people are very much reflective of one another. They become metaphors for each other. And I think, again, it becomes that much more of a motivation for wanting to do this work because it ultimately, you're not so much interested in the landscapes as much as you're interested in the people.
Right.
And it's a great opportunity to be able to extend yourself in a type of service that is helping people in a very foundational, fundamental, elemental way. And ultimately, I think that's that's why we're doing this work, is that it's really about trying to help folks.
That's deep, man. Yeah, that's a good note. That's a good note to end on, man.
Absolutely.
Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah.
Allah bless you and all this work, man.
Likewise. See, inshallah, we're gonna get you out there, man.
Oh yeah, man. Yeah, get my hands in the dirt, man.
That's right.
I'm at your service. At your service. Inshallah, may Allah continue to just increase you and bless you, man. And spread the benefit far and wide.
Ameen.
Ameen.